You're listening to the Nourished Child podcast, episode number 50.
Welcome to the Nourished Child podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey you, welcome to the Nourished Child podcast. I'm Jill Castle, your host, and today we are talking with Liz Weiss about the benefits and barriers of family meals. Just in case you're a newbie here, The Nourished Child is a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy ones, inside and out. Today's episode is brought to you by Try New Food. How to help new eaters, picky eaters, and extreme picky eaters taste, eat, and like new food. If you have a picky eater on your hands, I know it's not easy. While you might think the answer to your situation is in offering more veggies to your child, it most likely isn't the approach that will be most effective and nurturing for your child. In my book, Try New Food, I give you the approach that preserves your loving relationship while gently nudging your child with repeated exposure to food, positive feeding interactions, and finding courage and adventure at the meal table. Go to www.jillcastle.com/books to grab your copy of Try New Food and start helping your child taste, eat, and like new food. I have a lot of fond memories of family meals, but I also feel like I have had a long, torrid past with family meals. I've certainly taken my family through several iterations over the years. When my kids were younger, I fed the four of them at 5 o'clock. They were all lined up along the kitchen counter. I fed them early because they were in bed by 7, and my husband didn't get home until their bedtime. As they got older, we ate later so we could have dinner with Daddy, still at the kitchen island, because we didn't really have a kitchen table at the time. Then we started dinner in the dining room on Sundays. We worked on manners, storytelling, and waiting patiently for our turn to talk. My kids even learned how to pass dishes around and serve themselves. I have some very funny videos of that time. We had a lot of fun games we played at the table. And the fun was in having the kids say the darndest things. They created so much joy and laughter when we played games. Then I changed my whole way of feeding our family, switching over to family-style meals. If you follow my blog, you know that I'm a huge proponent of family-style meals, and I do work with my clients to help them transition over to that style of service. I made the switch for my own family for many reasons, and I honestly have not regretted or looked back since. I take quite delight when my kids have friends over and we do family-style meals with them, and they are always so wowed by the approach of feeding them. And just in case you don't know what family-style meals are, and I will include a link in the show notes to an article that gives you the basics about them. But they're a way of serving meals where kids come to the table and they serve themselves. They pick the foods that they want from the menu you've created. They place the amounts that they want on their plate, and they eat to their appetite. It's a very freeing way of serving meals. Now, 2 of my kids are in college, and my remaining 2 high schoolers are quite busy, and gathering around the table is harder than ever. Did you know that on average, family meals last about 18 minutes? This simple activity of breaking bread together carries a long list of benefits, making those precious minutes well worth the effort. Gathering around the family meal table is getting harder for so many families. Kids are busier than ever, going to sports and after-school commitments, but so are parents. They're driving their kids around, volunteering, working, and I think the family meal experience has suffered as a result. The benefits of shared family meals to children are many, from improving eating habits and a healthier body weight to the promotion of language development, stronger academic performance in school, a reduced risk of disordered eating, and a lower risk of substance abuse. With such powerful health benefits, could something as simple as eating together improve the health of our nation? According to Harris Poll data from 2016, about 30% of U.S. adults report sitting down to a family dinner 7 nights each week. Another 30% eat together 4 to 6 nights per week. Not bad, right? But there's room for improvement, especially for the remaining 40% who say they gather for family dinners just 3 times per week or less. The first step to encouraging family meals is to determine the barriers that make mealtime a challenge. The next step is to offer practical solutions aimed at making group meals more manageable. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss with Liz Weiss, registered dietitian and the voice behind Liz's Healthy Table. Liz is the voice behind the family food podcast and blog, Liz's Healthy Table, and she's written several cookbooks, including No Wine with Dinner, The Mom's Guide to Meal Makeovers, and the playful new coloring cookbook series, Color, Cook, Eat, available for download. Liz is the 2015 recipient of the Media Excellence Award from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and a frequent contributor to Today's Dietitian magazine. So let's welcome Liz without further ado. Hey, Liz, welcome to the Nourished Child podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
It is so fun to have another podcaster on the show. We could really nerd out and talk about podcasting, but I am really glad you're here to talk about family meals.
Well, I am so passionate about family meals, so thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. And you have a couple of kids who have grown and flown, I understand.
Oh, I love that. Grown and flown. Well, one flew back to my coop just a few days ago. But yeah, I've got Josh who graduated college. He's living in New York City with a couple of other guys, probably not sitting down to too many family meals, with his peeps, but, kind of eating on the go. And then I've got Simon, who's doing a gap year, and he just got back from Utah. He was working with AmeriCorps, doing trail work out there, living in a tent. So he was eating campfire food for a while. So he's back home. So we're back in the routine.
That's awesome. So you've been there, done that. You've certainly got a lot of experience with family meals. But I always am curious what family meals were like for you when you were growing up.
Oh my gosh, I loved family meal time. My mother was a home economics teacher. She did that before she had kids. And so she worked in elementary schools when home ec was still a requirement. And she did cooking with the kids. And so she was a big cook, and I kind of hung out at her apron strings, and I was always her assistant. And we always sat down to family meals. My dad would get home after a long day of work. He'd sit down and have some cantaloupe or have a grapefruit. That was like his routine, his little snack. And then we would all sit down in a little room that was off the kitchen. We called it the breakfast room, but that's where we ate dinner. And we always had family meals together. So, there was a little sibling rivalry. I won't lie. 3 girls. I was the pickle in the middle, but we sat down every night, as did my husband, by the way, when he was growing up in England. And so when we had kids, we decided to make it a big priority for our family to sit down and eat dinner together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I also grew up having family meals every night, and my dad, the same kind of routine, but I think his snack was a beer watching the news instead of a piece of fruit. But there was certainly routine to it. And our sibling rivalry, and I've talked about this on the show before, was finding the seat. We didn't have assigned seats. My mom and dad did, but we didn't. And I'm one of 4 and the oldest. And our scramble was always what plate was the fullest? Who had the biggest plate? That's where you wanted to sit down. So it tells you a lot.
That is hilarious. Well, I will tell you that we always had assigned seats at my table. And the area of our biggest sibling rivalry was not dinner time, but TV time. When we were allowed to watch TV, we would fight over the best seat, which had the best view of the television. So yeah, there was always a scramble of some sort going on in my house as well.
I think that's probably pretty universal for most families out there. Now, in terms of your own kids and having family meals, what do you remember, or what do they even remember about growing up having family meals every night? Or do they have any significant memories about that at all?
I would say if you were to survey my two boys, they would probably say family mealtime, the dynamic was that they would always somehow get into a little verbal argument with one another. A lot of competition with two boys, a lot of testosterone flowing. And I would always say, boys, I have spent so much time shopping and prepping and cooking. You need to have good behavior at the table. And then, of course, everybody starts to laugh. And then they egg me on. And then I go back to, I put so much effort into this meal. I need good behavior. So it always sort of turned into a joke. But family mealtime is something that I'm sure my boys, when they look back, will always cherish. And the great thing about these guys is that they always helped clear their plate. That was a huge thing growing up. And now it's a good habit for them. Always clear their plate. And they always help with dishes. And I think Josh, my older one, after he went to college, he was in a fraternity. And I think one of those frat pledge situations was that he had to do a lot of dishes. He had to go to that frat house and do the grunt work. So he kind of is in this habit now whenever he's home visiting. He always does the dishes. I love it.
Oh, that's great. I wish I had more help with the dishes after. I actually just the other night, I said, whatever happened to our rule that the cook whoever cooked the meal does not have to do the cleanup? That has been lost. I have to resurrect that rule.
Oh, I think you need to kind of put the hammer down on that one, Jill.
Yeah. It's a lot of work to do the meal and the cleanup. Mm-hmm. So as I was preparing for this interview with you, I was surprised to read that 30% of families sit down together 7 nights a week for a meal. That seems like really good news.
It sounds like good news. Yeah. And I think it is good news. But if you sort of look deeper into those numbers, you'll see that there's about 40% of people who hardly ever sit down to family meals. So there's definitely room for improvement. And that's the good news. I think once people are aware of it and they have the strategies, then they start to make a greater effort to increase the frequency of sitting down together.
And we're going to get into that because you're going to help all the listeners with, how they can do that more often. But you also mentioned that you did a survey of parents in your online community about family meals. And I'm very curious about what you found out.
Well, I had over 600, mostly women, respond to my survey. And I asked them about family meal time memories. You asked me that at the beginning of the interview. So I asked people, when you look back on family meal time, what sorts of memories do you have? And it was really interesting. I heard sort of some broad themes. I heard about routine. A lot of people, that was their biggest memory. I remember dad coming home because, remember it was more traditional back in the day. So I remember dad coming home and we sat down to dinner at 7:00 and there was always a meat, a vegetable, and a potato, very much a routine. And we know that kids love structure and they love routine. They thrive on that. So that was one of those big memory themes that came through. And I also heard about family mealtime giving people an opportunity to have some responsibility in the family. So that might have meant I was responsible for setting the table, or I was responsible for making dessert, or I always helped my mom make XYZ. So it was an opportunity for kids to be empowered and to grow up a little bit. And then, of course, there was those memories of bonding. One mom who took my survey said that she grew up in a family with 6 kids. So it was always very chaotic at the table. And one day her dad just went AWOL and he said, I can't stand all this, chatter at the table. So he had this little pig. It must have been like a little stuffed animal. He called it the talking pig. And he would pass it around the table. And when you had the talking pig, it was your opportunity to talk. So, funny stories like that. So you had all these great memories and stories coming through the survey. But then I heard a lot of regret. I heard a lot of longing. People saying, we sat down in front of the TV every night, or everybody was running in a different direction and we never did sit down to a family meal, or Sunday supper. That came through a lot. That was the one day we all gathered around the table. So that Sunday supper became their fondest memory of family mealtime. And that, of course, can be turned into a really great strategy for people. So it was really interesting in the survey because, you ask an open-ended question like that. And I have to tell you, I got a lot of responses. It took a while to go through it. But
Sure.
family mealtime evokes a lot of emotion and a lot of really fond memories. And so that's what came through on the survey when I asked that question.
That's such great information because I think that it's interesting to think about all the different, people come from a place, they come from different demographics, they come from different cultural backgrounds, they come from different economic backgrounds, but they also come from their childhood background, which has such a powerful influence on how they feed their own kids today. And so what do you think, or maybe some of your respondents alluded to this, but were there connections between what it was like for them as a child and what they're doing today, or if they're doing something different because of what they experienced as a child, or if they're continuing on what they experienced as a child because it was so good? Did any of that come out in the survey?
It did, absolutely. One mom said that when she got married, the first, and she moved into an apartment with her new husband, the first piece of furniture they bought was a dining room table. She had such fond memories of family mealtime growing up that she needed to and wanted to make it a part of her new life, even before having kids. I heard a lot of moms talking about, all these great memories and wanting to carry that through with their own kids. So making that a priority, despite all the modern challenges that we're facing. And then I heard from some moms saying that, they always sat in front of the TV and that they didn't want to do that today with their own kids. And then there was some frustration of people who had great memories, but just couldn't figure out how to do it themselves given their situation today. So it absolutely came through.
I love networking. I'm part of a podcast network called Parents on Demand, or the Pod Network. We are a network of fun and educational podcasts perfect for your family. You can explore the shows in the network by going to parentsondemand.com and searching specific categories. Parents on Demand also has a download for a free network app on iOS and Android, so you can listen to your favorite shows or find new podcasts. Subscribe through iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, or another provider. Every month, I will feature a podcast that I think will be helpful or of interest to you. Here's this month's podcast feature.
Fruits and veggies. We know we're supposed to eat them as parents, but getting our kids to eat them and try new things? Not so easy. Hi, my name's Corey, and welcome to Lean Green Dad Radio. I'm a husband, a father, and a plant-based athlete, and each week I get to talk to some of the most incredible folks I can find to help me stay fit, eat healthy, and really get the most out of life as a busy parent. Be sure to visit us online at leangreendad.com and keep going that extra mile for your family.
I know, and I want to talk about the common barriers because I think that's going to be very enlightening to a lot of families. But I know in my own practice with families that this is an area of struggle for sure. And a lot of guilt and a lot of wishing things were different. But I live in an area that's a commuter town to New York City. And so a lot of parents are working in the city, and a lot of families have one person in their family, one adult in their family that is not able to be home for dinner. And so that creates its own struggle. So let's get into what you have found are some of the common barriers to family meals. And you said the modern challenges. I think that's a really juicy term because I feel like, what might have been a challenge for my mom and dad or your mom and dad is very different from what the challenges are for today's parents. So let's dig into that.
Sure. The landscape is so different. It is always fun to look back, but we need to look at sort of those modern realities. And so the barriers that came through in the survey, and then the barriers that we read about when we're reading studies in the literature is there's several themes that come through. Distraction. Distraction's a biggie. And by distraction, I mean the TV and the cell phone, and even something like sibling rivalry. Those are things that distract us from focusing on the task at hand, which is prepping that family meal and sitting down and enjoying it. Another big barrier is just these busy and conflicting schedules, right? Someone's working late, kids have soccer practice, you got piano lessons. So because everybody's running in different directions, it's hard to sit down around the table. And then another barrier is pleasing everybody. And there's so much frustration for some families around finicky eaters, and this one, child A not wanting to eat something and child B not liking that creates a lot of conflict and a lot of challenge for families who want to get that dinner on the table. And then this lack of time. But I will say it's a really more of a perceived lack of time. A lot of people will say, I have no time to prep dinner. But if you look at the American Time Use Survey, if you look at numbers coming out of that survey, you'll find that on average, people 15 years old and older spend 160 minutes a day watching television. So just picture that.
Wow.
160 minutes a day watching TV on average. When you look at how much time goes into meal prep, women spend on average 37 minutes a day. Men spend 17 minutes a day on meal prep. So if you start to rejigger those numbers a little bit, maybe you start to realize, I might have a little more time in my day. So it's just, you've got to sometimes reprioritize. So those are those big challenges. Yeah.
This reminds me of a story that a fellow dietitian and I had been talking about. This was years ago, and she was talking about how she absolutely hated to unload her dishwasher. And she would let the clean dishes in the dishwasher just sit for days and days and wonder if her children would notice and unload it, or her husband would notice and unload it. And then she finally decided to time it. So to put it on a timer and to figure out how much time it actually took to unload the dishwasher. And when she timed it, it took her 4 minutes. And it really did give her that reality check, and which enabled her to make that mental mind shift to say, okay, this is only 4 minutes out of my day. I can take 4 minutes and unload the dishwasher. So I think that time and our perception of what we have, and as it relates to meals, sometimes we do have to do a reality check and a mental mind shift around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I don't like to empty the dishwasher either. So I'm going to do that same exercise, and I'm going to time myself. So thank you for that. I play a little game with myself, and I just like, how fast can you do this? How fast can you do this? How can you focus in on this and get it done as fast as you can? And so I've done little different systems of, taking everything out on the counter or taking things and doing them one at a time. So anyways, meal prep to me personally is the fastest part. It's the thinking of the ideas and the procuring all the ingredients, but the actual prepping and cooking to me is, once I've got the idea, it's pretty quick for me. But yeah, I mean, it really is. If you think about the actual meal prep, you're right. That could be the easiest part. The hard part is planning, going to the supermarket, coming home with your groceries, getting everything unloaded. So it's a process. And actually on my website, on Liz's Healthy Table, I have a freebies page. And under the freebies section, I have a 7-day meal planner. And you could just sort of write in what you're going to eat for the week. You could engage with your kids on that. So you're all sort of in agreement over what those family meals will be. You get buy-in from everybody. And then I have a supermarket shopping list. That's also a freebie. You print that out, you fill that in. Because I think quite often we end up at the supermarket with scraps of paper. We forget things. We don't really have a plan. And so we've spent all that time getting to the market and shopping and coming home, but we don't really have enough there, to get us through the week. And so having that plan, and maybe even designating one day a week or one afternoon a week where you do a lot of prep. So it kind of gets you ramped up for the week. It feels daunting, but in the end, it's going to save a lot of time during the week when you really don't have as much time.
Right. So tell me again where that is. That's on your website freebies page?
Yeah. So if you're on lizshealthytable.com, and on the top in the nav bar, you'll see cookbooks and freebies. And I've got actually the cookbooks I have there, which are just very inexpensive, $3.99 to download each. I've got a series of coloring cookbooks. And so it's a great way to get inspired for mealtime, because one of my coloring cookbooks is called the Wholesome Family Meals Coloring Cookbook. And you can cook, your kids can color, or you can color and your kids could cook. And so one of those strategies I was going to bring up when it comes to things like distraction at the table or distraction when you're trying to get meals prepped is you can keep your kids busy by just putting them down with a coloring book and some crayons and say, you color in that coloring page there. I'm going to go make dinner. And it keeps them busy and engaged while you get the job done.
That's awesome. I love that. And so let's talk about, and I will include the links to all of your resources on the show notes, but let's talk about some of those practical solutions you just mentioned. So having an activity for the children is an awesome one. While you're prepping and cooking, I used to do that myself. We used to color, do puzzles. I used to let them in the Tupperware cabinet and they'd unload and reload and unload and reload and make a mess. But some sort of activity for the kids is an awesome one. What about for parents or mothers or fathers who are running around driving kids all over the place and don't really seem to have the time?
Mm-hmm. That is where things like your slow cooker would come in handy. So for people who feel like I'm running around and I'm physically really not at home to get dinner done, then a few strategies there would be to use something like a slow cooker where you can load it up in the morning and then you come home and you're good to go. I've got a fantastic recipe on my website for pulled pork, and it's healthy because in that pulled pork, I'm using a lean cut of pork. I'm using some all-natural barbecue sauce. I'm using a shredded carrot. By the way, it takes 1 minute to peel and shred a carrot on your box grater, and a diced up bell pepper and some onion, and then in it goes, and then off you go. So having some kitchen gadgets that make life a little bit easier, but also thinking about recipes that are last minute in style. So if you have a well-stocked pantry, you can walk in the door and you can make cheesy, beany, corny quesadillas in 10 minutes. So it's flour tortillas, some frozen corn that you thaw. You've got a little bit of salsa, some shredded cheese, and a can of black beans. Open up the can, drain it and rinse it. And now you've got the makings of a veggie, plant-based quesadilla that's super simple. And maybe you've got some of those pre-washed salad greens that are in the fridge, so you don't even have to prep and wash them. They're good to go. A little bit of salad dressing. So you don't have to feel this guilt of this elaborate homemade meal every night when you can actually assemble ingredients quickly and then have a healthy dinner on the table.
I do that a lot myself because I'm still running around at the end of the day and very fast items. Breakfast for dinner is also very quick. It takes a minute or two to make scrambled eggs, or, if you've made pancakes over the weekend or waffles, to reheat those and serve those with a protein source. I say that often to my families too. It does not have to be elaborate. It can be a sandwich and soup night. A grilled sandwich or a cold sandwich. So there's a lot of just simple, quick, throw together meals that are easy and pleasing. And the other thing that I tell my families, I don't know what you think about this, Liz, but you don't have to put it all together for them either. You can just put the ingredients out and have them put it together. They can make their own quesadilla. If you put the ingredients out, they can assemble it and you can heat it up.
And also, if you have kids who tend to be a little bit selective, finicky, picky, whatever term you want to use, if you set out more of a make your own bar, like you were just saying, you could do make your own tacos, make your own pizza. You could bake up some potatoes, pop them in the oven before you go, run around town and pick up your kids. But you've got baked potatoes, and now you've got some toppings you can add to that. So setting out those bars gives your kids the freedom to pick and choose, to get involved, to customize. And it's not, like you're assembling all these meals. You're just placing those ingredients out Everybody helps themselves. And, getting back to what you were saying on the soup and sandwich, I love doing things like opening up a can of boneless, skinless pink salmon or tuna fish, making some tuna salad. And again, I'll peel and shred a carrot. I'll add some shredded carrot right into it because I love to get a little extra nutrition on the table whenever I can. And then I'll use whole wheat bread, and then I'll make with a little bit of cheese. It's almost like a grilled cheese with the tuna. It's like a tuna melt. And then I might open up a thing of like Pacific Natural or one of those sort of healthy soup brands. Maybe have tomato soup on the side. So it's really a veggie forward kind of a meal, seafoody meal, but it just takes like 10 minutes to do. So yeah, I think parents definitely need to not feel guilty. And if it's breakfast that you're having with your family, that's fine too. If breakfast is the one meal that you feel like, gosh, we're all here, then celebrate that. And that's a big victory too.
Right. What about some practical solutions for distraction at the table?
Oh, wow. Well, number one, turn off the TV and turn off those cell phones. It's funny. I was giving a talk at Today's Dietitian. It's a big conference they have every year. And I was talking about family meals, and I sort of opened it up to the audience and I said, give me some of your solutions. What are some of your strategies? And I had two really great ideas for the cell phone. This is so good for parents, especially of teens who have cell phones or spouses who won't put them away. Two things you can do. Number one, if you have little younger kids, you decorate like a shoebox, and the shoebox becomes sort of the little jail for the cell phones. And dinner, you put the cell phones in this little box, this little jail, and you put it aside. But because everybody in the family helped to create the jail, it's sort of fun and silly and playful. The other thing you could do is you could say, okay, we have a rule that whoever picks up their cell phone, looks at their cell phone during mealtime, you do the dishes. So that is a disincentive to have the cell phone on during dinner. So yeah, you get rid of the TV, you get rid of the cell phones, because we know that if kids are sitting there watching TV during dinner, they're more likely to eat let's say, less than healthy diet as they grow up. They're more likely to drink soft drinks and eat more junk food. And it's probably because they're either being influenced by things they're seeing on TV, or they're not sitting there kind of watching their parents eat. You lose that role modeling thing that goes on during mealtime. So distraction means setting some rules that are realistic. And also, like with my kids, even though I tried my hardest, I'm like, stop fighting at the table, and it's okay once in a while to dismiss somebody who's just ruining mealtime for everybody. So, you do that a few times and hopefully it calms things down a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. What we do with my kids aren't allowed to have cell phones at the dinner table here. That's just a family rule. But when we go out, we do a stack 'em rule. So we will stack 6 cell phones in the corner of a table when we're all together going out to eat. Well, Liz, this has been so insightful and so very helpful. Your solutions are so practical and doable. I think that's what I hope everybody who's listening to this episode gets from you, is that these are very practical and doable solutions. So I will include in the show notes your links to all your resources and your website. But I thought I'd love to give you the opportunity to let people know what you're up to in the near future.
Sure. Well, people may remember me as having a website called Meal Makeover Moms. And I had that website with Janice Bissix for many years. We were really 2 of the first dietitians to get into the whole blogging space. And we also had a podcast called Cooking with the Moms. And you were on that show. And
I was.
That show lasted almost 300 episodes. And we launched, it launched in 2008, and we wrapped it up in early 2017. And so in May, I created my own platform, an online platform called Liz's Healthy Table. And I have a blog, and I have all those freebies I was telling you about. I like to offer up a freebie like once a month. I have a cookie swap and a healthy cookie recipe freebie going on right now. And I started a podcast also called Liz's Healthy Table, so people don't get confused. And so on the show, I talk about real family food and I make it practical. So it's like everyday real family food. And I always have a guest on the show. So we might talk about healthy eating on a budget. I might have a guest talking about cooking with pulses, beans and lentils, legumes. And I've got a guest recently who talked about freezer cooking. Talk about a great way to get family meals on the table. She gets together with friends once a week. They batch cook, they freeze food, and off you go. And
That's awesome.
so a variety of things. So Liz's Healthy Table blog and podcast. And Jill, you're going to be on my podcast as well. And I'm really excited about that. And one thing that I love that you talk about is feeding styles, because we know you can get everybody to the table, but you want that dining or eating experience to be positive. So that's the next piece to this family meals puzzle. So you're going to tackle that for me on my podcast.
Yes. Yes, I'm looking forward to it too. And I am so glad that you mentioned meal makeover moms. And I mentioned that in your intro. You were such you are such ahead of your times. But when I think about 2008 and your venture, you and Janice, into blogging and podcasting, my goodness, you guys were so ahead of the times with podcasting back in 2008, 2009. And I'm just curious, as a podcaster, I told you we might nerd out a little bit before I let you go. What do you see the differences, now, almost 10 years later, from when you first started podcasting to now?
Well, the biggest difference is that there's a lot of podcasts out there and people understand them. I think Serial, which was a very popular podcast that was in 2015, 16, that really popularized podcasts. But it's easy for people to access. You could get your podcast on Google Play or iTunes or Stitcher or iHeartRadio, you name it. And the other thing too for podcasters like us is that it's just easier. I use Skype, you're using Zencaster now. So there's easier ways for us to record our shows. And I actually hire someone to edit my show because I thought, you know what? I'm not going to learn how to edit. I just have enough on my plate, on any given day of the week. And so, there's resources now. We can hire it out. We can hire people to help us. So podcasts are just sort of an everyday thing now. And it's just really been fun to watch that evolution.
I hire mine out too, the editing piece, but I didn't for a whole year. And boy, I tell you, I've gained a lot of hours in my schedule.
Wow.
when I'm not editing.
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. I know.
It's not easy.
No. We used to edit Janice would edit as well. And we were able to divide and conquer. But when I went out on my own, I thought, all right, I've got to cut back on a few things here. And so that was one of those things. It's worth it.
Well, I hope everybody who's listening heads over to Liz's Healthy Table podcast and website, checks out her stuff. Liz, thank you so much for coming on the Nourished Child podcast. It's been just wonderful to have you here today.
Thanks, Jill. It was so good to be here.
There you have it, folks. I'm so happy Liz could join me on the Nourished Child podcast today with her insightful information about family meals. I particularly enjoyed hearing about her survey of her followers to her blog and her podcast. It's really interesting to hear the real life data that she was able to collect. Please be sure to head over to lizshealthytable.com, where you can find her resources, her blog, her podcast, her freebies, all those goodies she mentioned in the show. The links to all of those things will be in the show notes. Don't forget, I have lots of resources myself on my blog. Go check out Try New Food, how to help new eaters, picky eaters, and extremely picky eaters taste, eat, and like new food. That can be a real challenge with family meals. So making sure you get your approach right and your interaction on a positive level with your children at the meal table is super duper important. As always, I thank you so much for joining me today on The Nourished Child. I'm so glad you were here. Please be sure to give the child in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Hey!